Good morning, everyone, and good evening for those of you joining us from the Northern Hemisphere. So we're here this morning / this afternoon with Stephanie from Nerdy Bird Collective. So she has very kindly agreed to come along today and talk to us about pellets specifically, and then a little bit less specifically, just general nutrition. This is an area that she's pretty passionate about. So I'm going to get Stephanie to just introduce herself and tell you a little bit about why she is talking about nutrition today. So thanks for joining us, Stephanie. And yeah, if you can just give us a little bit of info and say hi, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me share my screen. Okay.
There we go.
And then, hold on, it's going to make me
Technology.
find you guys again. I know. There you are. Okay. We're good to go. So hi, thank you for having me. I'm Stephanie Rosenblum. I am a chemist by training. This is like my part-time work. I'm a full-time chemist at a materials company. I am super passionate about parrot nutrition. For me, it represents an intersection of my two worlds, organic chemistry and birds. So just a little bit about me. I am in the Northern Hemisphere. It is evening here, actively snowing. I was born and raised outside of Philadelphia. My passion for birds started very early on. There's actually only 1 year of my life that I remember not having a bird, and it was when my childhood bird, Coco, passed away before I got Petrie, my Alexandrin. I currently have, it's just me and Petrie and our geriatric chinchilla Jensen, who is at least 18, and maybe you might see him pop out in the background at some point.
We don't get those here either. So like,
okay,
chinchillas are like a totally, like, I know what they are, but yeah, we just don't have them in Australia at all. So
yeah, they kind of look like a rabbit squirrel. Although you don't have squirrels either, I don't think.
No, but everybody knows what a squirrel looks like. So I think yeah, that's probably an apt description that we can kind of work with.
It's the tail. So yeah, I kind of put this on here as just my personal motto. I believe that we can all benefit from asking more questions and seeking knowledge from reliable sources and giving others the benefit of the doubt before drawing conclusions. And I hope that's something that's the energy that we can kind of bring to today's discussion. Because this, oddly enough, as niche of an area as it can be, it can become kind of a heated topic, which has been really fascinating for me. So my bird work, I am co-founder of Nerdy Bird Collective. I do nutrition and behavior consulting through our business. I like to constantly work on advancing my own education. I cannot recommend the Avian Behavior Lab enough, or workshops, which is actually where we met. Yes, in nice sunny California.
Yes.
I recently gave a presentation at Hillary of Avian Behavior International, her Avian Online Conference for Education and Training, on this very topic. So it's very directly related. And my other bird work, I'm a volunteer for the Parrot Education Adoption Center, which is based out of San Diego, where I am not. I am in Minnesota, where it is snowing. And I am an education volunteer for the Raptor Center at University of Minnesota as well.
That's all right. Awesome. So exciting. So many cool things.
I like doing bird things. I like doing chemistry things. Yes. So obligatory socials, they're all up there at the top. You can find me mostly on Instagram. I put my YouTube on here. In all honesty, I haven't updated that thing in I don't even know how long. Sometimes I'll be featured on Emily's channel. Emily's another co-founder of Nerdy Bird Collective. Her channel is Flock Life, so sometimes you'll see me on there to talk about parrot nutrition and target training also. So you can find a bunch of free evidence-based resources, all citations included, on our website at nerdybirdcollective.com. That's also where you can find information on behavior consultations with either myself or Emily, and nutrition consultations with myself. You can also always just shoot me an email if you don't want to go to our website. You can shoot me an email at petrithetiny@gmail.com. So that's I guess a very fast overview of everything you need to know about me.
Yes. Yeah. Awesome. So hard to keep up with all of the socials. It's like there's TikTok and there's Instagram, and there's Facebook and there's YouTube. And I'm like, this is just too many things.
Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, like our Instagram and our TikTok it's the same thing. It just gets posted.
Yeah, fair enough. That's yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Sweet. All right. Well, we'll jump straight in. So we did get some sent in questions, which is really helpful because it does just give Stephanie that opportunity to look into things, because some of the pellets and things that we have here in Australia just don't exist overseas. So it just gives her that opportunity to look into it. So we're going to start with those, but we do invite questions as we move along. Obviously, if Stephanie can answer them, she will. If it's something that we can't confidently answer without doing some research, and we'll just say as much, and maybe Stephanie can provide some details later, but we don't want to take up too much of her time. So do feel free to pop your questions in the comments as we go if you've got anything that relates to what we're talking about. And yeah, we'll try and get to those. Otherwise, we'll just work through what we've got to start off with and go from there.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right. You want me to go to the first slide, or you want to ask the question?
Sorry, I'm just pulling them up. So I think, yeah, you can go to the first slide. Did you include the yeah, perfect.
I did, yes.
Go for it.
All right. Well, yeah, it was really helpful having the pre-submitted questions. Like Lee said, a lot of the questions were around specific brands of pellets. But before we even get into that, the first question that was asked was really broadly about pellets. And the question was, as a processed food, how can it be better than a whole natural diet? And I love this question because there's like 30 things that we need to talk about in this question. So
this is the next hour, guys.
Yeah,
okay.
So like, settle in, go get your tea. Yeah. So many things to talk about. And the first is processed. What does that mean? Because it can mean a lot of different things. And the thing that we really need to recognize is that virtually all foods that we humans, our pets, come into contact with is going to be processed in some way. So what does processing look like? It can be as simple as cleaning produce. If produce has been cleaned, which we usually hope it has been before the time it gets to our grocery stores, it's been processed. Milling grains, that's a little bit of a bigger operation, right? That's a form of processing. Roasting ingredients, grinding and mixing ingredients, forming mixtures into shapes, baking, dehydrating, freeze drying. These are all forms of processing. And a lot of these steps are things that are very familiar to us. They're things that we can conceivably do in our kitchen. There's another really important aspect here of that some of these steps in processing can help increase the digestibility of certain types of macronutrients, in particular certain carbohydrates and certain proteins. So that's an important nutritional factor. It can increase the palatability of the final product. Most of us, know that cooked food tastes different than raw food. This is really, really important when it comes to our pets, because for most of our pets, the majority or a large part of their diet, at least, is coming from a single product. If it's not palatable, if it doesn't have the right taste or the right texture, you're not going to have a good time getting them to eat the food. So palatability is a really important factor that's often overlooked. Another factor that's often overlooked is that processing, one of the main reasons that it's done is to critically enhance food safety. So the way that certain ingredients are processed is going to, in some cases, completely eliminate the risk of pathogens contaminating the food. So all of this sounds pretty reasonable and pretty fine when we look at it as these individual steps that we can kind of think about doing in our own kitchen. But that's not how food is handled on a large scale, right? The larger the operation, the larger the equipment, the more regulatory processes there are. And overall, the more or the less familiar it looks to us. And when things don't look very familiar to us, it can be a little bit scary. So it's very understandable that we might have this kind of preconceived notion of processing being bad, especially when we start to consider the next slide, which is our own personal relationship with the term of processed human food. When I personally think of processed human food, what I'm not thinking of like my daily diet in most cases. I'm thinking of snack items, and I'm thinking of convenience food, right? Which is just that. There's nothing wrong with it. We're going to reach for it out of convenience. Nobody is saying that this should constitute, the main part of your diet. As opposed to pet food, when we think of processed pet food, we're thinking of, we're talking about parrots, right? So we're talking about parrot pellets, or in dog and cat world, kibble. So processed human food is very often high in simple sugars, high in salt, and very deficient in protein, certain vitamins, and minerals. And none of this is to say that it's necessarily a bad thing, right? It's not meant to be the total diet. It's not supposed to be a standalone, complete, or balanced meal. That is the complete opposite when we talk about things like parrot pellets or kibble. When done properly, and that's the key there, when it's done properly, and you've got people like qualified animal nutritionists, avian veterinarians on the case, these foods are designed to be a complete or near complete food that's providing a balanced macronutrient profile and meeting all of those minimum vitamin and mineral requirements. So our personal relationship with this concept of processed foods in human diets and in human diet culture is often negatively going to influence our perception of processed pet foods, which are fortified, well-formulated products most of the time.
You're getting a little bit.
Like part one.
So just on the note of you said earlier with regards to your internet, you are like, it's just a little bit, but just that I let you know. Yeah.
Yeah, just like interrupt me if it gets worse, because it will kind of, I can switch over to the other one. I'll just have to like leave and rejoin. Just let me know.
Sweet. I'll just wave my hands so that way I don't
totally
cut you off. Yeah. And obviously in the comments, if you're watching and at any stage, sometimes what I can see is a little bit different to what the viewers can see. So if you're watching and something cuts out or it doesn't seem to be working properly, just pop it in the comments, because we'll be able to see that, and we can do some things to try and fix it.
Yes,
all right, awesome.
Communication is the key, as they say.
Yes.
All right, so that's part one, tackling the idea of processed, what that means, our own perception of it. So the other aspect of the question was the idea of the natural diet. So you might be on board. You might say, okay, processed food, it's not so bad, it's not so scary, but still, can't we just feed the natural diet? Isn't that always going to be better? So we got to break that down, because the life of a wild bird is vastly different than the life of a pet bird or a bird in captivity. I don't care if they're free-flighted, if they're in a zoo, an aviary space, it's different, and we're going to go through it. So a wild bird, they're going to be experiencing temperature and weather changes. They may face and hopefully avoid predation, right? There's a lot of predators that are out to get parrots. They might fly from their roosting site to a feeding area and back again. Or if they're a type of parrot that doesn't have a designated roosting site, they're just moving around constantly. They're foraging for all of their food. If you're a neotropical parrot living near the equator and your day is usually about 12 hours, there's a good chance you're spending 9 hours of your day foraging for food. You're experiencing a competitive eating environment among the birds that are in your roost, in your flock, but also with other animals and other species, other entirely, monkeys. There's other types of animals. It's competitive out there. You're living outdoors, so you have access to natural sunlight. That's going to have influence over certain types of nutrients that may or may not be required, like vitamin D. You're going to, and this is key, eat what is available when it's most likely to be available. So not only are you factoring in the competitive eating aspect of this, which is going to lead you to eat things like unripe fruit, but you're also going to be eating things that are just very different than the types of foods that we have access to in the grocery stores. And really key to point out, wild birds don't always make the best choices. The idea of the natural diet being the optimal diet is not always the case. In fact, in most cases, it's not the best diet. And even what we define as natural, you can't understate the impact of humans on nature. What we might see a wild parrot eating in the wild might not be their natural diet because of non-native crops that pop up. Yeah, so humans are causing a lot of changes in what looks to be the natural diet of natural birds, or wild birds. They're all natural.
Yeah. On that last point, I'm sure I'm sure it was Dr. Scott Eccles who talked about when he was here in Australia and he was in Townsville, and they and like I'm quoting this out of memory, but he talked about, you know, how they caught up some sulfur-crested cockatoos that were wild and found, like, you know, and these birds had been like obviously just consuming chips and things that they were finding because they were close to human populations, and these birds were not healthy.
They had severe metabolic bone disease. They had severe
yes. Okay, you know what I'm
osteoporosis.
talking about. Yes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so like here's wild birds. They are making really poor choices and making themselves like incredibly unwell. And we see that really commonly here as well with, you know, just people feeding wild birds, obviously. And those birds are going to choose the foods that like are, you know, the highest in carbohydrates and taste good, and that's not always best for them. So.
Yeah, and even, you know, even if it looks like something like, oh, that looks like something that a cockatoo should be eating, there are plenty of reports of wild cockatoos eating non-native onion grasses. Onion, toxic food to parrots.
Yeah, so, and I think that's such a good point to make, because really, like something you do commonly see is, oh, you know, they know what they need. You know, they'll eat what they need. If they're deficient in something, they'll eat. And I'm like,
no. There are some really big limitations to it. For sure.
Yeah. They don't make better choices than we do, and we make terrible choices for our nutrition.
Very poor choices. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, so compared to a pet bird or a bird in captivity, it's pretty much all the opposite, right? Most birds, unless, I mean, certainly if you live in a climate like I do, where it's winter like 10 months of the year, that's an exaggeration, but it is currently the beginning of April and it's snowing. Most birds are living in a thermoregulated, weather-controlled environment. They're not dealing with rain. They're not dealing with high winds, all of that. That takes a lot of work to be able to withstand that. They might be around predators, cats, dogs, ferrets, etc., but hopefully their livelihood is not at stake every day, and it's typically occurring in a managed setting where it's not causing the same type of chronic stress that a wild bird is going to be experiencing. Even if you have a free-flighted parrot, the amount that your parrot in captivity is going to be able to fly or is going to want to fly is very different than what a wild bird has to do to survive. That's going to dramatically change how many calories they need to eat in a day. In the best cases, there's been scientific studies on this. The best case scenario, the longest measured time that a parrot in captivity was an African gray was measured foraging was 45 minutes a day. 45 minutes. That's nothing compared to the 9 hours a day that a bird might in the wild be actively searching for food. Unless they're in a shared aviary space, they're probably having a non-competitive eating environment. Most parrots in captivity don't have daily access to unfiltered sunlight. This is going to obviously vary based on your personal setup and where you are located, if it's feasible, depending on where you live geographically. The fresh food that they consume, even if you're growing it in your backyard, or if, you know, coming from the grocery store or a farmer's market, it's cultivated for human taste. It is different than what a wild bird is going to experience. I think Scott Eccles, actually, we're going to talk about Scott Eccles because that guy is great. Yeah, very knowledgeable. He talks about his experience seeing wild blueberries, like having nothing to do with humans, just like blueberries out in the world, and how vastly different looking they are from the blueberries that we get access to. Not to mention that you're going to get them when they're ripe, and the wild bird is going to have those different blueberries when they're unripe if they want to get it. And just like this is like the one similarity, the one thing in common, pet birds are not always going to make good choices, but where we have, we can control this, right? Humans have impact on the choices that a wild bird has, but we directly control it and can use that to our advantage to actually help the nutritional status of our birds in captivity. So the key takeaway from all of that very long-winded way of saying how I started the slide, which is that the lives of a pet bird are very different than those of their wild counterparts. So what this means is that they're going to have significantly higher caloric requirements. They're expending a ton of energy, so they're going to need to eat more. So their caloric requirements are much higher, wild birds, compared to pet birds. But here's the catch, their nutrient requirements, so like the mass, the weight of things like calcium, vitamin D3, vitamin B, all these other nutrients, that varies very little between wild and captive birds. And that's a really important thing for us to recognize, because it means that a wild parrot can consume a much higher quantity of a food that has a lower nutritional density to meet both their caloric and nutrient requirements. And that's kind of a big statement. So we are actually going to look at an example of it because I find it very compelling. What this means is that if a pet parrot were to eat the same diet, there's two things that could happen. The first is that they're going to consume too many calories to meet those minimum nutrient requirements, or they're going to consume the correct number of calories, but be nowhere near their minimum nutrient requirements. And the key takeaway to take to the next slide is that all of this boils down to the fact that the diet of a wild parrot can have a higher quantity of low nutrient dense foods compared to a pet parrot. So I am going to use a hyacinth macaw as an example, because if you're a bird nerd like me, you know that a hyacinth macaw has a completely weird diet. In nature, they are obligate granivores for one species of pine nut. That's all, or pine nut, palm kernel. All they eat are palm kernels. Unsurprisingly, these palm kernels are not cultivated for human use, so we don't have a whole lot of information on them. So I went down a deep dive and found the nutritional information for a palm kernel that is cultivated for human use in Nigeria and is very similar to what a hyacinth macaw would come into contact with. So what we can do is we can, through math, the power of math, we can calculate the number of calories that a wild hyacinth macaw would need. We can do the same thing for a pet hyacinth macaw of the same weight. And you can see, and I know that this is going to seem like a bag of chips, but a wild hyacinth macaw is going to need about 278 calories a day at minimum. I divide that by, multiply that by 4.18 to get to kilojoules, I think. I think you guys don't use calories over there.
No, we use calories. Kilojoule, yeah, we do. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I had to go back into my Gen Chem brain there for a moment. So a pet hyacinth macaw, living the life of a standard pet hyacinth macaw, which if you've ever worked with a hyacinth macaw, they like to be pretty stationary most of the time.
Not many people in Australia would have. They're very uncommon here, but I have. Yes.
Your photo on the poster is with good old Leo.
Yes, but I have also worked with a few here in Australia. So
yeah, they're big-bodied birds. It takes a lot of effort to get them in the air, and they fly in the wild. They fly for miles. It's incredible. But a pet hyacinth macaw living the average life, good life, it might be. A pet hyacinth macaw is only going to need 190 calories. That's almost 100-calorie difference, which, like I said, is literally a bag of chips for us. But for a bird, that's a huge difference. So, of course, this is going to mean that the wild bird is going to eat a lot more food, 54 grams of their palm kernels compared to a pet hyacinth macaw. And as a result, they're going to be a lot closer to meeting their minimum nutrient requirements than the pet hyacinth macaw. So all these numbers here, the 76, 51, 61, all of that, that's just percent of required minimum nutrient. Yeah, what you can see here is that the pet hyacinth macaw is not nearly as close to meeting those minimum nutrient requirements compared to the wild macaw. The other thing that's kind of neat to point out here is this calcium to phosphorus ratio. I know this is what the heck are we talking about here? But this is actually really important because it influences anything from our bone health or your parrot's bone health to their cardiovascular health. All those parrots that are prone to having metabolic bone disease, a lot of the times it's because they aren't getting enough vitamin D3 and they have what's called an inverted calcium to phosphorus ratio, which is what happens when you provide an all seed or all vegetable based diet that's not supplemented with calcium. So this calcium to phosphorus ratio, we ideally want it to be 1-to-1 or 2-to-1. So more calcium compared to phosphorus. But palm kernels, like pretty much all other seeds, nuts, vegetables, are the opposite. They have way more phosphorus than they do calcium. This is going to have really big implications on the bone health, long-term bone health of these birds. The other thing that we need to point out here is that this wild hyacinth macaw, it doesn't matter that they're not consuming vitamin D3. Vitamin D3 doesn't really occur in most plant matter. It comes from animal sources or from the sun, and the wild hyacinth macaw is exposed to that all day. Your average pet hyacinth macaw is not. So if they're eating this, they're not getting any vitamin D3, and they have this inverted calcium to phosphorus ratio. Not good. So both palm kernel diets are deficient in several key nutrients, but the wild bird's diet is much less deficient because they can eat more of it to meet their caloric needs. And this is where pellets come in. For the sake of simplicity, we looked at a one ingredient or one component diet for the wild, for the palm kernel diet. We're going to just look at, they're just eating pellets. And I picked Lefevre pellets because they're plentiful here. So the pet hyacinth macaw, if they were to eat enough to meet their minimum caloric needs, they're going to eat more of it because pellets are designed to have a lower caloric density than seeds and nuts, but a higher nutrient density. And that way, they can meet their minimum nutrient requirements without exceeding their caloric needs. And because they're formulated to meet all of these minimum nutrient requirements and have things in the right ratio, we can achieve things like an ideal calcium to phosphorus ratio. We can include vitamin D3 to get ahead of the fact that most birds are not going to have access to sunlight. So that's really where pellets come in. I can keep going on this topic.
Keep going.
All right. Well,
this is great.
This is kind of the last part of that question because we're still on that first question. Most people, when they talk about a natural diet, they're not really thinking about like, well, what does that bird eat in the wild? And can I get it in the grocery store? And I'm just going to feed that. That's not what most people are thinking. What most people are thinking, or what we view as like a very naturalistic type diet, very similar to like raw foodism and raw food diets that appear in human diet culture. So for people, a lot of the times that's going to look like a combination of legumes and grains, some kind of veggie chop. Maybe they're using some seeds to train their bird. I picked safflower seeds because you can pretty much get them anywhere. I gave people a huge benefit of the doubt when I came up with these formulations and assumed that they knew a hell of a lot about nutrition. And they're supplementing with the correct amount of flax oil to meet omega-3 fatty acid requirements. And this is going to be in contrast to a more vet-recommended typical diet, which is one that's based in fortified pellets and then supplemented with things like grains and vegetables, safflower seeds or nuts for training, and an omega-3 source. So how do these two types of diets compare? So we can start with fat-soluble vitamins. And this pink is going to be this fortified, more like typical vet-recommended diet. And then the gray is going to be this unfortified pellet-free diet. And these are going to be two diets that we're looking at like, you know, the same calories. I tried to make sure that the overall macronutrient composition is fairly similar between these two. So if we look at vitamin D3, the one that has pellets that are fortified is going to have vitamin D3. The one that doesn't have any type of fortification is not going to have vitamin D3 because vitamin D3 isn't found in plant matter with the exception of like a few very, very select certain types of algae that when exposed to a certain wavelength of UVB light under very specific conditions and processed properly still has vitamin D3. So basically none. That's going to be a problem unless that bird has access to sunlight. And if they do, fine, we don't need to worry about this. Vitamin E is going to be a problem, though. This is another essential nutrient. The bird on the fortified diet is getting more than enough, and it's okay that they're getting more. Remember, this is just % required minimum. We're still well below that maximum, that toxicity threshold, well below it. There's actually never been a reported case of vitamin E toxicity. It's one of the least toxic vitamins, even though it's fat soluble. But the unfortified pellet-free diet is at like 30%, right? That's really, really low. I consider something to be severely deficient if it's at less than 70% of the diet or of the minimum nutrient requirement. We can look at water-soluble vitamins. We're above 70% for all everything in the fortified diet. And in the unfortified diet, we're pretty good in a lot of cases, but we don't have any pyridoxine, vitamin B6. That's super important for neurological function and basically everything else because vitamin B6 is involved in a lot of different metabolic processes. There is no biotin that's going to have really important implications on things like feather health for very complex biochemical reasons. I have a slide on from a different presentation I can go into if anybody's interested. They're also not going to have any vitamin B12. So we have a lot of deficiencies even in just these water-soluble nutrients. We can look at macro minerals, things like calcium and phosphorus and sodium. And again, we're fine in the fortified diet, but in the unfortified pellet-free diet, we're really just approaching that kind of 70% threshold. So just above it. We are deficient in sodium, and we're fine in phosphorus. But remember what I said about that calcium to phosphorus ratio? We want it to be 1-to-1 or a higher amount of calcium than phosphorus. And we are at that inverted state, right? We have way more phosphorus than we do calcium. That combined with the fact that they didn't have any vitamin D3, big time problems. Microminerals, we are actually pretty good here. So that's nice to see. We are pretty deficient in manganese, but this is the one I really want to point out, iodine. How many of you are familiar with seeing iodized salt? We have iodized salt as humans because iodine deficiency used to be a really big problem, and it has massive influence in our thyroid function, which controls a lot of things like hormones. And birds are not spared from iodine deficiencies. It's very, very common in budgies that are provided an all-seed diet. They can end up with hypothyroidism, so basically an underactive or hyperthyroidism, from not having the proper amount of iodine in their diet. So that is maybe long-winded to you, but I actually just blew through an entire hour-long YouTube video that we have on this topic that also looks at another common diet, which is the unfortified diet that does contain pellets. So there are certain pellets on the market that are not fortified. So we also look at how that stacks up and how that can also be a problem. So like I said, I don't maintain my YouTube, but Emily does. And she has her channel Flock Life. If you want to learn more about percentages of macronutrients and micronutrients in common diets, you can check that out. It's called What's the Best Diet for Your Parrot? The Great Pellet Debate. So we like that terminology.
Yes, it is. I will also go find that and post a link in the comment section afterwards. I just also wanted to point out that, like you said, that is assuming that in the unfortified pellet-free diet, people, one, know what they're doing to an extent, and are therefore creating a chop and like a mash that has a variety, and that the bird is actually consuming.
Yeah, that's the really big part of it.
Yeah, is that like so many birds will, and people often feed like these really full bowls. So they're like, here's a whole bowl full of like loads of stuff. And your bird's like, great, I'm just going to sit here and eat a bunch of safflower seeds and also all of this fruit. And so if your bird was eating a good mix of everything, they might be getting some of that stuff. But if they're just picking and choosing, you're also going to be so much more deficient in a lot of those things that you talked about.
Yeah, and we talk about that in the video too, is the 3 diets that are represented in that video, 2 of which we just talked about here, are ones that I formulated, and it's like the best case scenario. Yeah. And you still have a lot of severe deficiencies. So incidentally, like I said, I also just gave a presentation on this along with Gabby Klinge, who is another founder of Nerdy Bird Collective. There's 3 of us. And this is really just deep dive talking about how our relationship with human diet culture influences the way that we feed our pets, oftentimes at their detriment. And it has an impact on their nutritional welfare. So these are important topics that we really understand. I think that the video recording is not available. So ignore this. I don't think that this is available unless you were able to attend the conference. But we did write a large paper on it, and I'm happy to send you a PDF copy. If you're interested in reading that, just email me at petrie@gmail.com. And I can thank you, Gabby. I see Gabby.
Yeah, I was just going to say Gabby's posted the link. So that's on the, for those watching on YouTube or from our Facebook group, the link is on our main Facebook page in the comments section. Gabby has been a legend and gone ahead and posted that.
Gabby's always a legend. And I should have said this too at the very beginning. This awesome bird swag that I'm wearing here and lots of other bird swag. Gabby is an amazing artist. This is her artwork here. she's incredible. We've got lots of bird themed swag, and she also just launched a shop as well. So I'm gonna plug you.
Yeah,
there.
totally. And I got one of your shirts for Christmas, and it's like the best. And I'm so sad that I like it's a Christmas shirt because I can't wear it any other time, but I probably can if I really wanted to.
You probably can. Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
All righty. That's all I have. So that's question 1.
Talking, guys, we're going to be here a while. I feel like that was a good question to start with because it covers off, and I think it'll probably some of the other questions, like we can kind of refer back to some of the things that we've talked about in this first question anyway, so it'll move along a little bit faster. Adrienne had a comment where she said, for most people, natural equals fresh veg fruit, limited processed products. Yeah, that is what most people think of. And yeah, that, you know, that is natural. But like we said, it's just, well, like Stephanie said, natural isn't always going to meet all of the requirements that our birds have.
That's what we're looking at here, right? And that unfortified, well, you can see, right? I mean, legumes, grains, veggie chops, safflower seeds, flax oil on the surface, it might look great and it might look really appealing, and your bird might even be, this is also assuming that your bird is eating all of this, right? And they're not having any of the selectivity issues. So it's important to be aware of. The appearance of the food often has very little to do with the function of the food and how it's actually nutritionally serving your bird.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
That's enough about that. All right. Well, this is the next question I have from the list.
Yes, okay. That was, from Alison, who, is over in New Zealand, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So the question in particular was basically asking about pellets that contain soy. And I put the question here very vaguely because this is probably the single most common question that I get. Replace soy with corn. That's the second most common question that I get. And most of the time it's not like, hey, I'm about to get a parrot. What should I feed them? It's like, hey, I have this parrot who's been on this food for like 10 years and I really like it. Or maybe I think maybe this person was the one who the rescue was supported.
So she was specifically asking about Vetifarm. So she said she wanted to hear the opinion on the quality of Vetifarm pellets. Her birds love them, but some people don't like to use them because of the higher amount of soy. And I'm not sure, I guess, I don't think it actually lists exactly how much soy is in it versus how much soy might be in another product. Obviously, and I'm sure this is the same in the US, where a product is listed in the ingredients list does indicate how much of it indicate that it's a higher amount than the next product, but it doesn't actually have a percentage. So it's not like soy is 90%. So it would be hard to say that Vetifarm has more soy than, say, another product that has it listed as, you know, the first or second ingredient as well. But,
right. Definitely. Yep. Very good point to bring up. So we'll get to the Vetifarm, which I'm glad you said it first because I would have pronounced it incorrectly. The first thing that we need to consider is like, well, why are we so worried about soy? So to understand that, we have to talk about what the claims are against soy. The first claim against soy is that it contains a high concentration of phytoestrogens, in particular soy isoflavones, and it's claimed that they are endocrine disruptors and carcinogens in humans. This has been so thoroughly debunked. I can't even tell you how many meta-analyses have been done on this that have thoroughly debunked this claim. Soy isoflavones might be problematic for rats and for mice, but they are neither endocrine disruptors nor carcinogens in humans. So we just need to establish that. Like, go eat your soy. It's a complete protein. It's super important if you're vegetarian, where it can be really difficult to get a complete protein. Soy is one of those. So that's humans. What about birds? So this is actually a really interesting case of where things going on in the parrot world had influence over laws in human world. So I don't want to get like too deep divey into that. You can look into this case, but basically what happened here is that there was a flock of parrots that was in New Zealand that were fed a diet that contained soy. and then, presumably, of course, soy isoflavones. And it was claimed that because of that diet, the observed reduced reproductive success and fertility. I forget how I started that sentence, but that it had to do with the soy isoflavones. This was not a scientific study. This was a person who had a flock of parrots and had them on this food and made this observation. It's a classic case of correlation does not equal causation. So a cause-effect relationship has never been shown in this case, and this is a singular example. It was not an experimental study. There was some people that were hired to try and prove a hypothesis that was already had preconceived notions behind it, and they tried to prove that this was the case. That's very poor science. That goes directly against the scientific method. So what has been shown in birds, because we care about birds, right? I just made the statement that humans are not rats, right? So let's talk about birds. Here's what has been shown. In quail, dietary phytoestrogen does not negatively impact the reproductive success, and soy isoflavones, when supplemented to laying hens, actually improved their bone mineralization and egg quality. So that's going to have a positive effect, right? Increasing bone mineralization and improving egg quality in laying females is going to decrease the risk of complications from things like egg binding or having a weak shell that cracks. All right, also in quail, most of our research is in like quail and poultry and chickens and such. Soy isoflavones did not impact weight gain or feed consumption. I bring that up because another common claim that you'll hear people say is that if you feed your bird a soy-based diet, they're going to eat more of it and they're going to get, they're going to put on a lot of weight and they're going to get nesty and they're going to start, wanting to reproduce. Has not been shown. All right, that's quail. What about parrots? Parrots are not studied with the same intensity or fervor, by which I mean there's not as much funding as poultry and quail, because we use those birds for our own purposes. But the critically endangered kakapo is studied, and because they're critically endangered, having a really good understanding of what's going to increase or maybe decrease the reproductive success is really, really important. So when it comes to the diet, if there's a risk that feeding them something is going to have a negative impact on their fertility and their reproductive success, researchers need to know about that. So there has been research on this. And what they found is that the little estrogenic activity that was found in diets containing isoflavones was unlikely to be any physiological or developmental significance for the critically endangered kakapo, which are now being maintained on a diet containing soy. We do love a kakapo.
We do. I know. As soon as you brought kakapo up, I started thinking about Gabby again.
They are just the coolest. So
and it's
oh, go ahead.
It's funny that you're like two New Zealand-based.
I know, right?
For a question that was asked by someone in New Zealand, so that's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing for me is like, y'all, if it's good enough for the critically endangered bird, it's good enough for my parrot. Like, we're fine. Yeah. So for Vetafarm, which is apparently not Vitafarm, they, it's not just about what ingredients they use, right? We have a video somewhere on our social media about the 5 things that we look for when picking a pellet. So these are just some of those things. They're formulated by avian veterinarians. They're formulated by people who know what they're doing, who have years of education, not necessarily specifically in nutrition. They do have at least one course in nutrition, but they also have so many courses that form the foundation of understanding nutrition science, chemistry, biology, physiology, anatomy. All of that plays into it. And they understand comparative animal nutrition, which is the basis for understanding exotic animal nutrition, because we don't have enough funding to understand the exact nutrition requirements of every single species on the planet. They are safe. They have many accreditations, one of which that I'll point out is GMP, or Good Manufacturing Practices. I point that one out because that's also one that we have here. And you can look into what that accreditation actually means, but basically what you think you are getting, and it's going through lots of regulatory processes to make sure that there aren't things like contaminants. It's fortified with vitamins, minerals, commonly deficient amino acids. They do not supply a very detailed nutrient analysis. That's something I like to see, but it's very uncommon for companies to actually provide a detailed nutrient analysis, because when they do, if you get a big nutrition nerd like me, you can conceivably reverse engineer it and know how to make their product. So that said, this is a super small community. And I've had a lot of success. If you reach out to customer service and you say, hey, I want to know the proximal analysis of the food, which is basically just, what is the detected nutrient levels in the latest batch of food, 9 times out of 10, they're going to send it to you. And the other super important thing here, it's accessible and affordable. This is the food that's going to make up a huge portion of your bird's diet. If it's not accessible and it's not affordable, it's not practical, and it's not going to be sustainable for you. So I would say, great, keep using it. Sounds good to me.
Yeah. And VetaFarm do lots of really good things within the community here in Australia and in New Zealand, and that as well. They support a lot of sanctuaries, rescues, organisations, rehab programs and things like that as well. So like from a social standpoint as well, they're actually such a good company to support, because they put a lot back into the parrot community, but also they produce food for a number of other different species as well. They are really,
awesome.
They're really involved, and I think there's also some feel good factors about purchasing their food, because that you're then supporting you're supporting our kaka rehabilitation program over in New Zealand, and I know that because Rachel, who started Parrot Life, she's the general manager over there, and they supplied food for the black cockatoo rehab program that we ran here for many years as well. And so they're really, really good at that sort of stuff as well. So I'm just going a little plug for VetaFarm, just for being an awesome company and supporting lots of different organizations and rescues and things.
Definitely. We are talking about VetaFarm, Elizabeth.
Yes. VetaFarm. Yes.
VetaFarm. Mm-hmm. Which we don't have here. Okay. References. They're important. There they are. Yep. And this is just a select few. I didn't want to put more, this slide could just go on forever. But yes, you can, this is recorded, I think, right? So you can go look into this more if you'd like. I think the unfortunate part just about things in science is that a lot of the times it's behind a paywall. So if you're having a hard time finding a certain article and you really want it, there's a good chance I do have access to it. And you can always email me as well and ask me, and I can send you a copy.
And also, the authors are normally always willing to send it to you for free if you reach out to them. So they don't get the money out of what the journals are charging you, and so they're usually more than happy to send you the entire paper if you're keen on looking at them. So
along with a very enthusiastic email.
I love that. Yes, this will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel, which is usually the easiest place to find it, but it'll also remain on our Facebook page and stuff as well, but YouTube's usually an easier place to find it. And I'm loving this so much that I'm definitely going to be cutting sections out and reposting them to our Facebook page forever and ever and ever, because there's so much good information. And I know not everyone is going to sit through 90 minutes, but if I post a 20-minute clip about soy, people are going to jump on that.
For sure.
Awesome.
Cool. This is the next question I have, and we can jump around too if you're like, that's not what I had. But somebody asked, is there evidence to support a 100% pelleted diet? They asked about, we know that a 100% seed-based diet can lead to all sorts of long-term ailments of the obesity, fatty liver disease, metabolic bone disease type variety. But, is there evidence for feeding 100% pelleted-based diet? And I will say yes, but first I want to take a step back. I don't know a single avian veterinarian or qualified animal nutritionist. I don't even know a pellet manufacturer that actually recommends feeding a 100% pelleted-based diet as their primary recommendation. Yes, they can be fed as 100% of the diet, but this is very rarely the recommendation. So I think I bring it up because I think it's important, because a lot of the times this conversation can become so narrow lens and focused, and we're either talking about a pellet diet or we're talking about a diverse raw whole food diet. And that's just not the reality. It's not this like us versus them. Nutrition is so much more complex than that and so much more nuanced. So I just want to put that out there that most of us are not saying you should be doing this. But that said, yes, there is evidence. The first is from Tom Rowdybush, which if you're familiar with Rowdybush pellets, Tom Rowdybush is probably the single most published researcher on companion parrot nutrition. He is extraordinarily knowledgeable. In fact, when I think of like the expert in avian nutrition, I had the opportunity to speak with him, and he said, I know nothing compared to Tom Rowdybush. You should really be talking to him, which to me was just like absolutely insane. So Tom Rowdybush, while he was at UC Davis, had a research flock of orange-winged Amazons that have been successfully maintained on nothing but Rowdybush pellets since 1981. So that's one. The second is the Hari flock. Hari is the Hagen Avicultural Research Institute up in, I want to say Montreal, Canada. They have, yeah, I know they're in Canada. I think that they're in Montreal.
Yes.
They have a really interesting research flock because they have a lot of different species. They have at least, they have more than this, I think. These are the ones I know they have: Amazons, macaws, Quakers, Alexandrians. We love to see an Alexandrian represented. They're spectacular, like never represented. I'm obviously biased. Lorikeets, parrotlets, conures. They've got a lot of different species. And all of their birds were raised on food from Hari, so their Tropican hand feeding formula, and have been successfully maintained on the Tropican pellets. So those are two examples of long-term feeding trials, right? So this is different than if you go out and you try and find like a decades-long experimental study on, feeding a 100% pelleted diet. You're probably not going to find it, right? Because experimental studies are usually confined to laboratory studies are confined to a much shorter period of time, most of the time. And when they aren't, it's usually looking at a very, very long-term study for something that has huge significance in human health. So things like, Alzheimer's studies or cancer studies that, have a lot of funding where they can follow people for their entire life. We're not there with parrots, right? We probably won't ever be. So there's feeding trials, and these are two examples of that. And then there are experimental studies. And there are a lot of experimental studies that have used 100% pellet-based diet or pelleted diets or diets that are heavily based in pellets to look at specific things. How does it influence breeding status? How does it influence calcium serum levels? Or I don't know, anything else, cholesterol plasma levels, right? And so there's a lot of those types of studies, but they're not going to be looking at it over, the lifespan of the bird. So yeah, I would say yes, there is evidence. It might be different than what we're usually talking about because it's feeding trials, but that's just the nature of this type of research. And again, most people aren't going to say go feed a 100% pellet-based diet.
No, that's right. And if you look at the back of any of your pellet bags, again, Vetafarm, comes to mind, you'll find that, at most, they generally recommend no more than 80% of the diet as pellets, and then the rest is fresh food. So,
and as Gabby said, outside of nutrition, we're obviously talking about nutrition here, so it's going to sound like really derivative, right? But food, we know food is so much more to us than fuel. Right? We have a social aspect of food, and it brings us joy. And there's so many other aspects than just, well, what's it doing for your body? And that's going to be true for parrots too, right? I mean, social feeding is a huge, huge part of it. A lot of people talk about, pellets being boring. I don't really agree with that. And there's a lot of things that you can do to make your bird work for food. You can put them in a foraging toy. But yeah, there's so much more to it, and offering some degree of diversity is going to be helpful in one way or another.
If you ask my birds, pellets aren't boring. They're excited for their pellets. So and I know lots of birds and lots of people that say to me that their birds are excited about their pellets, or their pellets will be the first thing that they go for over their fresh food. So, that behavior doesn't necessarily support that, that pellets are boring. So yeah, they're the same, and they probably taste, everyone probably tastes the same. That doesn't mean it's boring. Every chip tastes the same. Every, hot chip tastes the same, or for you guys, fries, but they're still delicious.
Not to mention the fact that parrots have like not very many taste buds. They have a fraction of the number of taste buds that we have, right? So like the importance of taste and ability to detect that might also be different for them. We can't really comment on that.
Yeah, they might be more interested in the texture or, you know, yeah, different things to what we're
all that
looking
good
at.
stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Cool. That's my next one. All right. This is why it was good that people submitted questions ahead of time, because I don't know what this brand is. I had to look into it. We do not have this in the United States. So I actually almost considered not even making this slide and just like going through my process with people, but I had a feeling that we were going to be kind of short on time, so I ended up making the slides. But anyway, someone was asking about just like a review of these pellets and, you know, are they good? And, you know, the first thing that I always look for is, well, what's the company? Who is making these pellets, right? Because that's really important. Are they qualified?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways that we can look at qualifications. So, you know, you can go onto their website, which is what I did. And I will say, Lee and I were talking about this before I got on. Because I'm in the US, a lot of my search results are going to look different than what is available in Australia, that they're going to be filtered. So that's just something to be aware of. If you're having difficulty finding about information about a brand that's in the US, you might be running into some of the same problems that I did. But you can go onto their website. You can find that they were founded by these two people who have seemingly relevant backgrounds: biochemistry, microbiology, hematology. They did a significant amount of research on the nutritional and energetic requirements of native birds. They later started working with veterinarians and institutions, like one in Adelaide, to continue researching the nutrition requirements in zoo animals. They came up with a synthetic type of milk that could be fed to, I'm not remembering what animal it was now, but basically to support that animal. So they've done a lot of research, and they seem to be, you know, pretty well qualified for the role. They didn't actually begin developing bird food, though, until they brought on an ornithologist and aviculturist. So somebody who knows a bit more about birds. You can combine all of these skills and put them together, and, you know, that looks pretty well rounded. I always like to know, you know, anybody can say that they are a biochemist or that they, you know, are an aviculturist, right? These aren't regulated terms. Like physician is a regulated term. Well, I guess that's actually not even regulated in all states, but anyway, I like to find information about, you know, the credentials. In some cases, it's hard to find that type of information online. That doesn't mean that they don't have those credentials. It just means that they don't have a very large online presence. So when in doubt, just email customer service, because this is a small community, and like they're going to be excited that you're interested in learning more about their founders and, you know, their formulators and all of that. Like that's exciting for them. We can look then at the food and we can see, well, what are the ingredients? And, you know, I look for the usual suspects, things that I know have a pretty good, you know, protein, amino acid profile, are providing important essential fatty acids like linoleic acid. And then I look for fortification, and they're fortifying with vitamins, minerals, and commonly deficient amino acids. They aren't providing that detailed nutrient analysis. We talked about that, right? It's really uncommon for places to provide that. You might be able to email them and ask for a proximal analysis, and they might give you it. The other thing I look for is support from avian veterinarians. And this is where, like, you know, my search results are probably quite limited. All of that other stuff, I can find that information. But I like to talk to avian vets and get their opinion on something, because they're going to see if there's nutritional implications. They're often going to be the ones who see that first or see it more often. And this brand is supported by avian veterinarians. So like I said, you know, we talked about some of these X's. None of these are necessarily bad things. It's, you know, a lot of people don't have a strong online presence, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not well qualified. So again, when in doubt, email, ask questions. To me, these pellets appear to be pretty high quality. Their limited online presence makes it difficult to say with total certainty. But even saying that, just because somebody has a very large online presence does not mean that they are qualified. So just some stuff to think about.
off the top of my head, I know that one of our consultants had some pretty good conversations with Wombaroo Passwells, and they were really open, and and the person that she spoke with had a lot of good information and was very knowledgeable, and so they were really open and honest to speak with, and she was really impressed by kind of their knowledge and
Their
things like that.
openness.
We were specifically kind of talking to them about like lorikeet and lorry mixes. So, and they had a lot of really good information and background on their
Yeah.
mixes and things like that, specifically for like those nectar eating.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's, if they were looking at native birds, the diet, when we think about parrots, most of them that we have in captivity are granivores, they're granivorous. It's actually pretty different from, especially in Australia, you have so many nectarivores, right? And a lorikeet is a nectarivore, right? So having a really comprehensive background of native bird feeding requirements and nutrition requirements is going to be really helpful for a species like lorikeet, where they're pretty different. They're pretty different than other parrots.
Yeah, they are. Yes, cool. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, cuttlebone. This was a fun question. Is it actually good for parrots? I write yes and no because I wasn't really sure how to interpret this question, because a lot of people ask me, is cuttlebone good for like beak conditioning? And the answer for that is like, no, it's not going to do anything. If you've ever like played around with cuttlebone, it's just going to crumble. It's not going to do anything for beak conditioning.
So soft. Yeah.
It's like giving your bird Sola and then being like, why is my bird's beak overgrown? You're giving them sponge, basically. Which is great. Like my bird loves Sola, but it's not gonna.
It's fun. Yeah. It's enriching, but it's not gonna keep their beak in condition.
Yeah. So, is it good for other things? Yeah. So cuttlebone is a soluble source of calcium. Cuttlebone is calcium carbonate. It dissolves very easily in the proventriculus. It's digested in the proventriculus. Birds have two stomachs. Super cool. They've got the proventriculus and then the ventriculus, or the gizzard. Sometimes you'll hear the gizzard talked about as like intestinal teeth, because it can be really muscular, and it's got this like hard substance in some species that has this like funny grinding, refluxing action that mimics the mastication that our teeth do. So that's fun. Sorry, bird nerding out there. So there was, this is a really commonly cited study looking at basically the bioavailability of calcium carbonate. So in this case, it was in canaries, so passerines. We're not talking about psittacular or parrots, but bioavailability should be pretty similar. Passerines and psittacula have basically the same digestive system. A couple of differences, but not where it would influence bioavailability of calcium carbonate. So these two groups of canaries were provided basically the same diet, a commercial seed mix. They were both provided access to a cuttlebone, but unlike parrots that don't, in maintenance and in adulthood, they don't require grit, passerines do. Most passerines do. So one of these groups of canaries was provided insoluble grit, so things like sand. And then the other group was provided soluble grit, oyster shell in this case, which is also calcium carbonate, just like the cuttlebone. They were maintained on this diet for 6 weeks, and then their feces were collected and analyzed for a period of 10 days. And they did all kinds of proximate nutrient analysis to see how well things were digested and all of that. And what they found is that first group that was denied access to soluble grit consumed more than 3 times as much cuttlebone than the group that did have access to soluble grit, which suggested that the cuttlebone was actually an efficient mineral source in canaries. So we kind of talked a little bit earlier about birds not always making the best choices, and can a bird actually like detect when it has nutrient deficiencies and then seek that food out? For certain nutrients, yes, they're actually very good at it. And calcium is one of those nutrients. Certain amino acids like methionine, they're able to detect as well, and be able to actively seek out those types of foods that would be high in that. But by far, calcium is the one that they're most sensitive to. So if you're providing an all-seed diet or an entirely homemade diet, these are diets that don't have a lot of calcium and they have that wrong calcium to phosphorus ratio. Calcium supplementation still might not be enough, but you should provide it. On the other hand, too much calcium can also be a problem, especially for certain species like cockatiels. Like I said, parrots are usually pretty good about being able to detect when they need more calcium and then going to seek that out. So this isn't usually a problem. Where having too much calcium in the diet could become a problem is if you're feeding a pellet that wasn't formulated by somebody who knows what they're doing and they add too much calcium, right? Because the bird's not going to have any control over that at that point. It's mixed in. But if they have to actively seek it out and they already have enough calcium in their diet, they're probably just not going to interact with their cuttlebone. And that's a really common thing that I've heard people talk about is, hey, I have this cuttlebone. My bird just does nothing with it. Well, if they're on a pellet diet, they probably don't need any calcium. It's not doing anything for them, for their beak, or it's not usually a fun texture for them to interact with. So there you go. So that's kind of my yes and no answer to that.
That's a good one. Yeah, cool.
It's often how it goes. I think we were joking before about the "it depends" answer, and yes, it depends. So just kind of there was another question that was really, really similar. Are calcium bells safe for parrots? So the cuttlebone is just like, usually you have to buy a holder for it. And it's just, kind of shaped like that. I don't know what you're saying, but something like that. And you kind of pop it in. The bell is usually it's like part of a toy. So for this, I would say it depends on what it's made of, because I've seen ones that it's sold as a calcium bell, but it's actually made of insoluble grit, like sandstone or silica, in which case it's a much harder substance. So it might be good for beak conditioning, but it's absolutely not a calcium source. But if it's made out of oyster shells or cuttlebone, or sometimes you'll see a mixture where it's a composite of cuttlebone, oyster shell, and eggshell, those are all calcium carbonate, and that is going to be a calcium source. So, it depends on, well, what are you trying to use it for? And then check what the calcium bell is made out of. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. That's an easy one. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Soluble grit is not an efficient thing for beak maintenance. I apparently thought that was important. All right. And now for something entirely different.
The question was whether leafy greens are safe for conures and macaws. And I think just to, I guess point out here that generally, if it's safe for one parrot, it's pretty much safe for all parrots. With the exception of, you do need to be careful that some birds are more sensitive to particular things. So lorries and lorikeets are sensitive to iron storage disease. And so therefore you do need to be cautious about what you are feeding them, and what you are feeding together, because of the way the body kind of produces those. But generally speaking, there's nothing that's safe for macaws that is really unsafe for another species.
Definitely. Yeah. So that's really important to point out, right? If you do have a lorikeet, or if you're not a parrot person and you have a myna, or a toucan or something like that, a species that is prone to iron storage disease, you need to be careful about hot foods that have a lot of vitamin C. A lot of people are really worried about the iron content. Most fruits and veggies don't actually have a lot of iron, but some of them have a ton of vitamin C. And there's going to be iron and other things that they come into contact with, like their pellets. And vitamin C is basically going to ramp up that iron activity. It's going to ramp up basically the bioavailability of it, and then that can be a problem. Although I will say the role of dietary iron in the pathogenesis of iron storage disease is still being investigated, because birds that are on very low iron diets and very low vitamin C can still develop iron storage disease.
And that's why it's also important to feed your lorikeet specific food as well, and to not let them go necessarily consuming a bunch of pellets from your other birds' aviaries or cages as well. So
because they're very cheeky too. They'll go in and steal a bunch of other birds' foods. They're all over the place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I will say, like we already said, right, conure, macaw, cockatiel, for most parrots that we're talking about, with the exception of lorikeets, or non-parrot commonly kept species, starlings, myna, etc. It's basically going to be the same. And this is not a comprehensive list. I'm not going to go through all of this. I put them in terms of color because a lot of the times people ask me, if they're feeding a pellet-based diet, they'll want a chop recipe, or they're looking for chop inspiration. And if you're feeding a pellet-based diet, You don't need to really worry too much about the exact composition of the chop. And you can just get creative with it. You know, make sure you're including at least one dark orange veggie and at least 1 or 2 dark leafy greens. The reason for that is that those 2 types of veggies are super high in beta carotene. Beta carotene is a vitamin A precursor, and of any of the vitamins or minerals, whatever, that parrots are most likely to be deficient in, it's vitamin A. Even if you're feeding a diet that has, you know, pellets that have an appropriate amount of vitamin A, it's super, super sensitive to storage conditions. It's super sensitive to basically every type of condition it could come into contact with: UV light, moisture, heat, getting too dry. Vitamin A just like wants to break down. So even if it says it has 8,000 international units per kilogram of vitamin A, especially if it's in a clear bag, which the vast majority of pellets are sold in a clear plastic bag, it doesn't have that, right? So make sure you're feeding your orange and green veggies. But yeah, I like thinking about it as, you know, different colored fruits and veggies have different benefits. They have different antioxidants. A big part of this is that what gives veggies and fruits different colors, a lot of the times those pigments themselves have antioxidant type properties. And there's also just different types of nutrients that are going to be in those colors. So make sure you're getting your orange and green, incorporate some others. Blue and purple, not super common to find in the vegetable area. But fruit, you know, berries especially are great because they are super high in antioxidants, and of the fruits, they are way lower in sugar. So that can be a big problem for people, especially if they have a bird that's more prone to having hormonal expressions, whatever you want to call it, nesting behavior, hormonal behavior, however you want to talk about it. So, you know, berries are a good option. So that's all of that. I would say it's probably easier just to talk about what not to feed your bird, because most other things are like usually pretty okay. I'm not going to list the things that are obvious. Don't give your bird alcohol, right? Sometimes I get that question. It's not safe for them, so don't give your bird alcohol. These are the 3 foods that are acutely toxic, so fairly small amounts. And this is going to depend, right? The amount that a macaw has to eat, you know, blue and gold macaw has to eat is going to be different than the amount that a 32-gram budgie is going to have to eat, right? But if you suspect that your bird has consumed any amount of any part of the avocado, if you have an avocado tree, it's all parts of the avocado: the plant, the stem, the fruit, the pulp, the skin. All of it has this toxic compound persin that can be fatal. This can be very problematic, right? Allium species, these are things like onions, garlic, leeks. Actually, I don't know if leeks are. That might be wrong. Leeks might be cruciferous.
Yeah, good point.
Garlic and onions for sure. The amount of these different types of toxic compounds, which in this case are sulfur-containing alkaloids, is going to vary with species, right? So like, one type of garlic is going to be different than one type of onion. I know plenty of people that use a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of garlic in their chop, and it is fine because it's not a high enough dose to induce toxicity, but it is a high enough dose to get some of the other benefits that are in garlic, right? And that's kind of, don't be so quick to judge others because they might know something that you don't, right?
So just leek is part of the same family, leeks.
Okay, leeks are. Yeah.
And water said I feed leeks with no harm, but yeah. Do we go into the anecdotal evidence side of things? But it's much like what you say, where people that feed a tiny bit of garlic, and it's not harmful in a really small. It's going to depend on the it's like some dogs will go and eat a grape and they're fine, and then you get another dog who eats one grape and they're like dying.
Everything is horrible, right?
And so how sensitive your specific indivial animal is to something is also going to play a part, as well as
and
how much of the toxic
method.
thing is. Yes, and how
also
much of that toxic compound is in that.
Yeah, because that's going to vary too. Not all types of things vary with growing conditions, but that's something that could vary with growing conditions, right? So there's going to be fluctuations. Chocolate This is probably the one that I get the most anecdotal. I've been feeding my bird an M&M a day for 40 years and they're fine. I hate to break it to you, but M&Ms actually have very little cocoa in them. So the toxic compounds in chocolate are in the cocoa, right? So in this case, they're methylxanthines, things like theobromine and caffeine. So also anything that contains caffeine, tea, coffee, etc., can be a problem. Most foods that we come into contact with don't really contain a bunch of theobromine. It's really just chocolate. So the darker the chocolate, the less your bird needs to eat of it to have toxicity. I will say that there are very few cases of chocolate toxicity in birds, but those that have been reported have been 100% fatal. So for these, acutely toxic foods, if you suspect that your bird has gotten into it, just call your vet, like immediately, because worst case scenario is you bring your bird to the vet for no reason. Maybe they get some, a lot of the times it's some type of activated charcoal. In certain cases, if they get into something, maybe they're going to be provided a chelation therapy. These are things that are not going to be a problem if, maybe your bird didn't ingest avocado or chocolate. If they get provided these things, it's not going to be a problem. But if they did ingest it and now you're being able to provide them that, you might have saved their life, right? So when in doubt, call your vet. The other things that are, I'll say, potentially harmful, they're not going to be as acutely toxic as those other three foods, are the leaves of certain plants like rhubarb. Rhubarb contains oxalate crystals. Most of us know that too, because humans, we don't want to eat rhubarb leaves either. A lot of people don't know this, but the leaves, the planty part, not the fruit, of nightshades, so things like tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, eggplant, those are also toxic. So if you're, and again, it's not necessarily, if your bird gets into like a little bit of a pepper plant, it's probably not going to be a big deal, right? These aren't as acutely toxic as those other compounds, but it's something to be aware of. Uncooked and unsprouted beans, this is what accounts for the vast majority of food poisoning cases in humans, people eating beans that have not been cooked all the way through or sprouted properly. They contain lectins, which are rendered inactive when they are properly cooked or sprouted. Again, unlikely to be like fatal, but good to be aware of. I put comfrey on here. I don't think that this is very popular for people anymore. This is actually banned in the United States now. But it used to be a very popular herb among canary breeders, and it kind of found its way into the parrot world for a little bit there. It's no longer advised for human consumption either because of suspected hepatotoxicity ranging from fatty liver disease to liver cancer. So that's the other one to be aware of.
Yeah. Adrienne has said, we hear this a lot regarding avocado, but there are aviculturists in the US who have aviaries in avocado groves. The parrots would eat the fallen fruit with no consequence. I suspect that the problem is that most of our avocado is picked unripe and artificially ripened. This prevents the person levels from decreasing as it does in wild, naturally ripened fruit. And I know there were some recorded cases of lorikeets getting into avocado groves here in Australia as well and consuming the food. But it's still something.
There's so much to talk about there too. Yeah, it's is it worth the risk? It's also wild birds eat things that pet birds don't, that naturally decrease the how effective that toxin can be in the body, right? So they'll eat things like clay. Is it the kakapo or is it the key? I can't remember now. One of those birds eats chocolate, just like straight up goes out and eats chocolate, which is toxic.
It's probably Kia. That's something that they do for sure. And where kakapo are, they probably can't get access to anything like that. But
yeah. I would think that they would probably have that under control for them since they're but they eat so much of these other things that Gabby has confirmed that basically inhibit the toxicity of that. And that's also true. I was just having this conversation with my mom, who was very concerned about there's a lot of reports about heavy metals in dark chocolate and how it's above thresholds, and my God, there's so much to unpack there. But a lot of the times what we're ignoring is that there are also other compounds that naturally occur in our diet that decrease the toxicity of that. If you eat a bunch of certain types of heavy metals and you're also eating a bunch of vitamin E, or you're eating a bunch of other certain types of binding agents, it's not going to get into your bloodstream the same way that unbound material would, and it's not going to wreak havoc the same way, right? So, we do have to be careful about the way that we talk about these things, because like in no way am I trying to fearmonger by talking about things that are toxic. It is very important for us to have a level head and understand that like this is not binary. It's not like your bird eats avocado, your bird is dead, right? There's so many things that are factors there. But, of course, you love your bird. You want to do the things that you don't want to intentionally feed them something that could be acutely toxic. And if they get into it, it is good to have an understanding that like, okay, maybe it's not the end of the world and I should take it seriously and I'm going to call my vet, but like, I don't need to be losing my mind here. Because that's like the worst thing in the world. If you're already concerned, you don't need to be losing your mind.
Yeah. Agree. Awesome. But yes, I agree. It is sometimes easier to go through what we definitely don't want to feed. But, certainly, it does just come back to like, if it's safe for one bird, you're pretty good to go with another bird. Yeah. And leafy greens, definitely good because they do have lots of really good nutrition in them as well.
Oh yeah. Yep. There they are. It was white fruit. I had a hard time I was like, do I want to think about it as like the outside or the inside?
The inside.
I went with the inside. But yep. Yeah, so you can, save this list if you want. Because my bird is on a pellet-based diet, I have chop recipes. They're available on our website. There's a free guide. There's 2 chop recipes that are designed to be pretty balanced when fed alongside a recommended pellet-based diet. But like I said, if you're feeding a pellet-based diet, you really don't need to be too worried about making sure you're getting all of the different vitamins and minerals in the exact right quantity. And you can just kind of have fun with it. So I'll just go to the grocery store and may have a little mental checklist of red, orange, green, blue, etc. Yeah. I think those were all of the pre-submitted questions. I have backup slides on common questions, but yeah, go for it.
I did get one other, and this is, I guess, it's kind of related. It was from Morena, and she has asked if pellets should be available to them all day long, or is it better to get them available at certain times of the day? This is a good question, and I mean,
it's a good question.
I tend to. So I use pellets a lot as foraging activities. So because they are dry and therefore they're less likely to grow bacteria, get moldy, drip everywhere. I could wrap them up in paper and cardboard and it's not going to get all mushy and gross. I use pellets a lot as like primary foraging activities. So I don't have pellets just in a bowl in the cage during the day. I usually do pellets twice a day, half in the morning in some kind of foraging activity, and again half in the afternoon in some kind of foraging activity. And then I'm a bit more, liberal with my fresh veggies, which might be in a bowl or they might be in a foraging activity as well. But I'm definitely, when you do a consultation with us, you'll generally find that we recommend not just feeding bowls of pellets and not having them freely available, but to rather feed what your bird should be consuming of that on a day-to-day basis. Stephanie, I'll let you.
I have the exact same answer. That's exactly what I do too. I find that if you don't use pellets as the primary foraging activity, it's not, there are certain types of veggies that you can use for sure, but if you have a standard 9-to-5 job, you might run into some perishability issues. It just can be kind of hard to clean up. There's all these things that can happen, right? So then you're left with things like nuts and seeds. I almost said needs and suts. And then it's like, okay, well, it's really easy to overdo it with nuts and seeds. And if you're providing that as primary foraging, that's going to decrease what you can then do in training. And your bird is probably more wanting to work for nuts and seeds than they are pellets. So it's just, I basically do the exact same thing as you, Lee, and that's what I recommend too. And if you need help figuring out how much your bird actually needs, I know it's math, but it's very easy math. And we've got it detailed in one of our guides. I think so. I don't think I took the equations out. In our nutrition
any
guide.
moment now, Gabby's just going to drop it in the comments. Yeah. Like she's dropping things in the so it's good. We'll just wait for Gabby to bring that up. So there were a couple of other questions that came through while we were talking. So Tiana, I hope I'm saying that right, has asked basically a similar question about whether to leave pellets in all day and then take them out at bedtime. So we basically answered that. Yeah, we recommend using them as foraging activities, and therefore, yes, they would, you might leave the foraging activity in all day and let them work through it over the day, although most birds are probably going to mostly empty it first up. So that answers that question. And I think we just had one about potato from Ward. So he said,
I've heard mixed reports.
So I've heard mixed reports. Does it need to be cooked? It needs to be cooked, but did you review potato?
We did not review potato, although potato is on here somewhere. We've got orange potato, sweet potato, and we've got purple potatoes. So I recommend lightly cooking potato. You can cook it all the way. The problem with that is that it can get really mushy, and that can, for a lot of birds, lead to some undesired hormonal type nesty behavior. So I wouldn't recommend making it, cooking it so much that it gets to that aspect. But yeah, cooking the potato does result in some changes to the macronutrients that are favorable. Is your bird going to die from eating a raw potato? No. I mean, maybe a whole potato, because that's just like way too much for them. They'll just like blow up. But yeah, if you I'd pop mine in the microwave for like 3 minutes. I'm very, very lazy when it comes to the way that I cook potatoes. That's how I cook them for myself. That's like a very common meal for me for lunch, is just to take a sweet potato and chuck it in the microwave for a couple minutes. But yeah.
White potato though, like generally, it's not that it's harmful for your bird, but it's really high in carbohydrates and it's just, you're probably feeding your bird a lot of calories that they're not
you do have to be aware of that
elsewhere, and so and even with sweet potato and stuff as well, you want to be a little bit cautious with anything that's high in those super like energetic type
they're
things.
very starchy type vegetables, and a lot of people will not feed potatoes or peas for the same reason, because they are very starchy. Just kind of moderation, and also your bird. Like there are people with birds that I know where you could factor in 1/2 of a almond into like a black palm cockatoo's diet. A bird that can have more than half an almond and be okay and still be able to have a balanced diet, but that half an almond for some reason just totally triggers them into having a lot of undesired behavior that is undesired for us anyway, and for our relationship with the bird, right? So just keep your individual situation in mind too.
Elizabeth has asked a question about spinach. So she said, are there any concerns with spinach and preventing calcium absorption? She meant there, or just don't feed it daily.
So as far as spinach preventing calcium absorption, there's kind of a couple things there. So spinach has a lot of calcium in it. It also has a lot of oxalates, and oxalates are, you'll often hear them referred to as anti-nutrients. Want to get ahead of that. Like, I know it sounds really scary, anti-nutrients, but there are also a lot of positive health effects that can come from consuming certain types of anti-nutrients. So like, let's not go so far with the pendulum swinging the other way. So the amount of calcium that is bioavailable in spinach is just lower than what we think it is. If you look at, the amount of calcium in spinach, in your mind, just say like 20% of that is what's actually in there. So is it going to prevent calcium absorption from other foods? Not really. It's just that not all of the calcium in the spinach itself is going to be bioavailable. So yeah, if your bird likes it, you can feed it. Just make sure that you're feeding other food sources that are high in calcium, because that is a commonly deficient nutrient.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Also, I guess one other thing is, like, if your bird doesn't like, some birds, they really like something in the raw form and then they only like it in the cooked form. The problem with spinach that I just described, and all, if you're like, I don't want my bird even eating those anti-nutrients, which that's a whole other conversation. But when you cook it, a lot of those are going to go into the water, right? And they're going to bring all of that calcium that they're bound to with it, right? So, yeah, hope that answers it.
I think it does. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. So I think that's all the questions that have come up. So I'm happy. I don't know if there are any, like you said that you've got a couple of common questions. I'm happy for you to go through some of those if you want to. Sure. If you are, we've been on for an hour and a half now, so we will, look at wrapping it up in the nearest future, because I know that other people will be starting to. But, if there are any particularly common, like, kind of frequently asked questions that you get that you want to cover off on, we can definitely just touch base on those quickly.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to do it. Maybe I can get ahead of some emails. Is my thought process. So, yeah, I guess this is like the general form of the question that is super common. Is X a problematic ingredient? Is it a filler ingredient? Right. And like just talking about that. So just like we kind of broke down processed and processed food and what that means, we really need to think about like what a filler is. Because it turns out that there's no definition of filler as it pertains to pet food. There are certain terms that have actual definitions and are regulated in a very specific way. When they are not, they don't have a definition, they can't be regulated, right? So this is an unregulated term, and what that means is marketing. So filler comes up in marketing all the time, and it's usually fear-based, and that's not a coincidence. So this fear-based marketing, if you see something that's saying, hey, we're free of this, we don't contain this nasty filler, 99% of the time, they're going to then provide you with their product that they exclusively sell that is free of those ingredients that they just convinced you are killing your bird, right? So that's something to be aware of. I'm a chemist. I work in a materials industry where we do have a definition of what a filler is. This is my paraphrased version of it, is that it's a substance that adds bulk to or decreases the density of a material or formulation without significantly changing its properties. And this is usually done to decrease the cost of goods. That's why we call it a filler, right? You're adding something to it that is cheap and it's decreasing the overall cost, but it's not negatively influencing the properties. The way that most people think about fillers and their personal definition of what a filler is in food is kind of similar to the definition in materials industry, is that they think of a low quality, cheap ingredient that doesn't add to the nutritional value of the food, and in some cases may even detract from it, or they might even think that it's even causing harm to the consumer, being, the human or the animal. And all of this is really unproductive to the purpose of a pellet. So remember that pellets are designed, we looked at this in the example of, I'm doing this because I'm thinking about the chart of the palm kernel diet and like where pellets come in and how that's useful for pet parrots. They're designed to provide your bird with enough nutrients that have been identified by very qualified people to be necessary to maintain health. And they're also designed to be of lower caloric density. So they're trying to do a lot. They're trying to pack in a ton of nutrition into something that is relatively low calorie compared to other commonly consumed food items. So the purpose, a filler just doesn't fit into this, right? It would completely be counterproductive to the goal of a pellet. In fact, I would make the case that there's really no such thing as a filler ingredient, because just about anything that we add to the food is going to change the nutrition profile, right? If anything, you could maybe make the claim that an isolated fiber is a filler because it doesn't, add to the nutritional properties, but it does have benefits, right? High fiber diets do have benefits for birds. So even in that case, it's like, okay, great, it has fiber. So it's not a bad thing. I think my two backup slides that I have are just like, these are the things that people like to say are fillers, and it's just not true. So we talked about soy a lot earlier, if you want to go back, or really we talked about what soy is not. It's not an endocrine disruptor. It doesn't have carcinogenic properties in humans or parrots, but I didn't really talk about what soy is. And it is a great source of many vitamins and minerals, and an excellent source of a high quality protein. So that's very important. Corn, people really don't like corn. I don't know why. I don't know why people don't like corn. It's highly digestible. It's one of the most studied foods in terms of digestibility studies in animals. It is one of the best and only plant sources of linoleic acid, which is the essential omega-6 fatty acid. It's the omega-6 fatty acid that's most present in avian tissue. So super important, and corn is very, very high in it, where most vegetables and grain sources aren't. It's also a super, it's high in protein. It's a great source of B vitamins, potassium, magnesium. One B vitamin in particular that corn is very high in, that most other grains and vegetables are not, is biotin. And I think I've mentioned earlier biotin having some very, very important roles. And added benefit, yes, it's cheap. That's not a bad thing. We don't need to be, elitist about this. The fact that it is cheap keeps the cost low, which is good for us.
We it's cheap that. Because it's just easy to grow, and it's not cheap because it's bad. It's cheap because it's easy to grow, and there's lots of it being grown.
Yep, and we have an industry for it. If we way back in the day decided, we're going to grow quinoa, that's going to be the crop that we want to capitalize on, then maybe people would be saying that quinoa is a filler and everybody should be having corn. So just some stuff to think about. Peanuts, who they get a bad reputation that they do not deserve. We have I kind of cite this blog post, fill me in. We have another blog post entirely devoted to peanuts. Peanuts are a great source of antioxidants. They are high in protein. They are very low in saturated fat. For the type of ingredient, the reason why peanuts are being used, alternative ingredients that would serve that same function are much higher in saturated fat. They're rich in polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fatty acids. They have a very bad reputation due to the highly overstated 99% of the time anecdotal risk of mycotoxin contamination and erroneous link to aspergillosis. You can read all about that in the blog post. I won't go into it in great detail here, but I will state that aspergillosis, which is very scary, nobody wants to deal with an aspergillosis infection. They can be really hard to treat. Most of the time, aspergillosis infections come from your bird having a very suppressed immune system and then being exposed to a huge amount of Aspergillus flavus, which is the mold that then goes on to lead to aspergillosis, but it has to be in the inhaled form, not in the consumed. So if your pellets are made with peanuts, they're not going to get aspergillosis from those peanuts. The other three are
Gabby.
Thank you, Gabby. Salt, sugar, vitamins, and minerals. We're going to start with that last one here. I don't know why vitamins and minerals are referred to as fillers. Like, even by the made-up definition of a filler that we have concocted, they are quite literally adding vitamins and minerals to the food. So I think that the idea is that if you were to select more nutrient-dense ingredients, then maybe you wouldn't have to add vitamins and minerals. So it's like substituting out. That's just not true. The types
I think
of
it's also because it's so processed, they have to add these things back in, etc. Therefore, natural is better.
Right, and it's just, it's just not the case. Even if you have a cold pressed, unprocessed pellet that, which there are certain ones on the market, if they have natural forms of, whatever type of vitamin, they're still prone to the same type of degradation that the synthetic form is in storage, right? It's really not any different. So they're added to pellets primarily to make up for naturally occurring deficiencies in the ingredients that are appropriate to use to feed our parrots, right? A big part of this is vitamin D3, calcium, phosphorus, and certain missing essential amino acids like methionine. And yes, they are also added to compensate for minimal losses that occur during processing, but this is so overstated. People really blow this out of proportion. It's not very much in the vast majority of cases for most vitamins and minerals. Salt and sugar. People go after salt. Salt is necessary. So salt is sodium chloride. Sodium is an essential nutrient. We cannot make our own sodium. Parrots cannot make their own sodium. That would be quite the feat to be able to do that. It is necessary for your cells to function. If you don't have sodium, you die, is the short answer for it. So it's added to pellets to make up for naturally occurring deficiencies in the ingredients. It's also a natural preservative. It is not added in excess. It's fine. We don't need to worry about this. Sugar, people get very concerned about sugar. The vast majority of pellets don't actually have added sugar. There's only a few brands that actually do add sugar. It's very low on the ingredient list. It's not in a high enough concentration to substantially change the macronutrient profile at all. It's really just being added in a tiny, tiny little amount so that when those ingredients go through certain types of processing, a certain type of reaction happens that causes browning of the pellets and increases the palatability. That's why it's being added. It's not having this big, massive influence on your bird from a nutritional standpoint. And the sugar we're talking about here is sucrose. That's, when most of us think of like table sugar, the white powder, we're talking about sucrose. There are other types of sugars, right? Sugar just refers to simple carbohydrates, monosaccharides and disaccharides. They're naturally occurring, right? So if your pellet has, added fruit juice or, things from fruit, guess what? It has sugar added to it. So just pointing that out. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not pointing it out to be like, change pellets. Definitely not. There's no reason that we need to be so worried about all of this. But when we create fear, we also create business opportunity. And people will take advantage of that. So yeah, I just want you all to save your money.
Yeah. Yep. Tiana has said, is corn served okay, either raw or slightly cooked and steamed? And the answer to that is yes, both of those are fine.
Oh, yeah. Yep. It's also really common to have like dehydrated corn husks and such as part of toys, or even like the corn itself that is dehydrated. Just remember that if you're providing that and your bird's actually consuming it, just remember that's part of their diet.
Yeah. And the biggest thing is always like, again, everything in moderation. Birds tend to love corn. If you feed too much, they're going to fill up on it and they're going to ignore eating other food sources. And it is high in energy as well. And so if your bird's eating a ton of corn, that can influence their behavior also, or influence that reproductive status that they might have. So
and the thing to point out too is, when we think about corn, we're usually just thinking about the fruit. A lot of the times, there are a lot of other parts of the plant that are being used in the pellet, right? We're not just talking about the fruit being the yellow part.
The kernels.
Yeah, the kernels. Thank you. Couldn't remember the word kernel.
That's okay. You've been talking for nearly 2 hours. And you've used lots of really impressive words.
Sorry.
No, they're good. They're, I'm just like, I wouldn't even know how to pronounce that word. I have to pronounce it in my head first and then hope it comes out correctly. So
okay.
And you just
I didn't know how to pronounce
off your tongue.
Yep, I'm a chemist. Obnoxiously long names. But I didn't know how to say Veda Farm, so
that's okay. Yeah, it's I think it doesn't really matter. Awesome. Well, I think we should probably start to call it,
Probably about
And
that time.
let you go and probably, have a celebratory drink that was amazing. Like, honestly, so much really good information in there. I learnt a ton. I know that I'm going to be coming back to this over and over again just to remind myself of things that we spoke about. I'm most certainly going to be like I said, kind of cutting different sections out and then resharing them back to our social media pages for people to watch, because there's some really good information there that, in little sections, I think people are going to come back to. It will remain available on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page for however long those social media platforms remain available. They will not be deleted. YouTube is obviously the easiest place to find these sorts of things usually. Facebook, you gotta do a lot of scrolling or searching, and it doesn't always bring things up. And then like a final, this is where you can find Stephanie, is in her the nerdybirdcollective.com, their website, which is where a lot of those blog posts are available. And go check those out. There's lots of free resources and content there from them, as well as her Instagram, Peachy the Tiny Dinosaur, and at Nerdy Bird Collective as well. Lots of good stuff there. On both of those Instagram pages, Stephanie has done some reviews on different pellet brands. They are kind of North American pellet brands.
Yeah, it's pretty US-centric.
Yeah, but Harrison's is available here. Tops is available here, and I know you've done reviews on both of those. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see something on Supreme in the future. Wink, wink.
Yeah. We'll get back to them. I need a break from Canva.
I get it. I get it. So you can go and check those out as well. There's lots of really good information, and Stephanie does behavior consultations and nutrition consultations. So if you're looking for that extra bit of help with your bird, or you think your bird might struggle with, particular ingredients, you find that, you're like, well, I feel like my bird is, a bit crazy if I feed them this type of food, then, sometimes having that nutrition consultation can be really, really good, because diet, aside from playing a really big part in obviously your bird's physical health, it actually does play a huge part in your bird's behavioral health as well. Mm-hmm. Like Stephanie said, there are certain vitamins and minerals that will improve their neurological function, and that neurological function will play a part in your bird's behavior. So getting these things right can mean the difference between having, a behaviorally healthy bird or a bird who is struggling.
Yeah, and all those graphs way back when, like 2 hours ago, where we looked at, contents of different nutrients in the diet. The nutrition consultations are a bit different. We go through a lot of stuff, right? Specifically for your bird's diet. And we look at, especially if you're interested in changing the diet, or you just want to know, where are their deficiencies? What could I be doing better? We're going to look at it. So you get like a very large packet of information. So it's a bit different, but anyway, and you don't have to do any of the math. I do the math.
Make Stephanie do your math. No, that's awesome. And just a massive thank you for putting together the slides and everything. It's been really detailed, very informative.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. It's been really great. And hopefully I know we've debunked some of those myths that are going around, and it's especially, I guess it's a very relevant topic at the moment. It's definitely coming more into the light, and there's a lot of, it is the great debate at the moment within the bird world. Mm-hmm. And there's some really polarizing opinions within the industry. So it's good to have that, not just someone going, well, this is better because, but actually going into those detailed reasons as to why, this is, important. So
it does continue to amaze me how heated of a topic it can be. And, just if there's one thing that you walk away from with this, nowhere in this are we recommending a single diet for, this is the diet that your bird has to eat. It's going to take into account so many factors. What's practical for you? The status of your bird. Are they breeding? What's their age? Do they have pre-existing medical conditions? Right? It's no one diet fits all birds. That's not at all what we're saying here. It is really nuanced. So that's, if there's one thing that you walk away from, just, keep that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why nutrition consultations can be really helpful. And it's like behavior, there's no one answer. Like, you can't say to me, how do I stop my bird from biting? And I just give you a recipe.
It depends.
Yeah, exactly. It depends. I can't give you a recipe for that. That's why, we say we need you to book a consultation, because there's actually a lot to go over here. And that's the same with your diet. There's no like one recipe, one size fits all for, your birds. It's going to depend on lots of different things. So
yeah,
awesome.
absolutely.
Well, I'll let you go, but thank you so much to everybody who came along, to those who submitted questions in advance, and those who, added some questions throughout the session today. And yeah, thank you again so much, Stephanie. That was amazing. And yeah, awesome.
Thank you. Thank
Have
you,
a great
Gabby,
night.
for posting links.
Yes, Gabby, you're a legend.
MVP.
Have a wonderful Easter, everyone, and yeah, we'll be back soon with another live.
All right. Have a good night or day.
See ya.
Bye.
Both.